He looked me straight in the eye and said it, "We need fresh ideas, not old blood." Just like that, my younger brother Travis fired me from the company our grandfather built with his bare hands. 22 years of my life gone in 10 minutes. But what Travis didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already built something new, something stronger, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why that was the biggest mistake he ever made. Stay with me, because what happens next is something no one in that boardroom could have seen coming. My name is Jake Whitman. I was 45 years old, senior project director at Whitman & Sons Construction in Omaha, Nebraska. That company wasn't just a job. It was my blood, sweat, and history. My grandfather started it with 2 trucks and a wheelbarrow. My father turned it into something respectable. I made it thrive. We became the 3rd largest commercial builder across 3 states, and yet there I was, sitting across from my own brother, who had just become CEO, watching him toss me aside like I was some outdated tool. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just smiled, stood up, and walked out of that boardroom like a man who knew exactly what came next. They thought I'd break down. They thought I'd beg. But I didn't need that company anymore. The truth is, I had already moved on and taken something very important with me. What Travis didn't realize at that moment was that by cutting me loose, he was severing the company from its very foundation. And as I walked to my truck for the last time, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just leaving. I was about to become his biggest competition. And trust me, he'd be calling me a lot sooner than he expected. I stepped into the parking lot with the kind of calm that feels unnatural. The sun was barely starting to rise over Omaha, casting long shadows across the pavement. My truck sat there like it always had, same dent on the left fender, same old toolbox in the bed. But something had shifted. I wasn't the man who parked it that morning. That man had a title, a place at the table, a name on the door. Now I was just a guy with 22 years of sweat equity and a plan no one saw coming. As I stood there beside the driver's door, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad either. There was just this steady hum beneath my skin, like the quiet before a storm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. There it was, the email from Ben Harding at Crestwell Properties, time-stamped 5:52 p.m. the night before. Confirmed, it read. Crestwell is officially moving forward with JW Buildworks for the new office complex. A $3.2 million contract. My contract. My company. JW Buildworks wasn't just an idea scribbled on a napkin. It was real. I'd registered the LLC 6 months ago, leased office space, secured a modest credit line, quietly started talking to our top clients. I wasn't poaching. I wasn't violating contracts. I was preparing. There's a difference. Travis thought he was pulling the rug out from under me. What he didn't realize was I'd already moved the furniture. For 2 decades, I'd been the one out in the field shaking hands, solving problems, walking job sites in steel-toed boots, while Travis sat in glass offices drafting strategy. I built the relationships. I sat across from every one of our 5 biggest clients and delivered their projects on time, under budget, and without excuses. I knew their spouses' names, their golf scores, their concerns about concrete shrinkage ratios and city permit backlogs. And they trusted me because I showed up, always. The moment I left that boardroom, those clients became the tipping point. Not in theory, in cold, hard numbers. Between Crestwell Riverview Development, Blackstone Commercial, Westfield Properties, and Union Square Holdings, I had influence over accounts worth more than 60% of Whitman & Sons' annual revenue. Not all of them had formally signed with me yet, but they were watching, and they were loyal, not to a name, not to a brand, to me. I climbed into the truck and sat for a moment, staring at the empty passenger seat. It reminded me of all the things I'd sacrificed for that company, years spent on the road, instead of on family vacations, missed birthdays, swim meets my daughter's first, broken heart. My first marriage didn't survive it. Neither did half my friendships. I gave everything to Whitman and Sons, everything, and now it was just gone. But oddly, I didn't feel hollow. I felt clear. Back at my new office on the west side of town, 2 rooms above an accountant's office, I unlocked the door and stepped into the bare space. Fluorescent lighting hummed overhead. The furniture was rented, the walls empty. The old sign on the door still had the previous tenant's name on it. But to me, it was already a headquarters. Not flashy, not polished, but mine. I had barely set my laptop down when the phone started buzzing. Caller ID Travis. I let it ring, then again, and again. On the 3rd call, I picked up. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" His voice was high-pitched, shaky. "Ben Harding just called. He's pulling Crestwell's contracts. Says they signed with someone named JW Buildworks. Sounds like you've got a problem," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Did you do this?" "Is this you?" I secured my future. "Just like you did." A long pause. "Those are Whitman and Sons clients." "No, they were my clients. I built those relationships. I earned their trust. This isn't legal. We'll sue. Go ahead. I never solicited them while employed. Didn't sign a non-compete. My lawyer says I'm in the clear." Another long silence. I could almost hear the gears in his head turning, realizing how badly he'd misplayed his hand. "We're brothers, Jake. We can work this out." There it was, that tone. The same one he used when we were kids and he broke Dad's hammer or crashed the 4-wheeler. Always a plea when it was too late. "We were brothers yesterday, too, Travis. Didn't stop you from humiliating me in front of the board. That was business, not personal." I almost laughed. "The family name is on the building. It's always personal. I made a mistake. Come back. We'll figure it out." I looked down at the plans spread across my desk. The Crestwell complex was no longer a dream. It was a live project my team already lined up to break ground. No, I'm good where I am. It's not just Crestwell. Riverview's calling too, Blackstone. They're saying the same thing. Now I did laugh. "You're not calling because you want me back. You're calling because you're in trouble. There's a difference." That line landed hard. The silence that followed said more than anything he could have responded with. Eventually he spoke again. "What do you want, Money A seat on the board? Name it. I don't want anything from you. I've already got what I need. You take those clients, the bank will call our loans. You know that, right?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Sounds like you've got a problem." Then I hung up. And that's when it hit me. Not the thrill of victory, not revenge, just a strange, quiet finality. The cord was cut. The chapter closed. I was on my own now, fully. But the next morning, someone unexpected knocked on my door, and what he brought with him would change everything I thought I knew about how deep this mess really went. The knock came just after 8 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a second I thought maybe one of the subcontractors had shown up early. I opened the door and there he stood, Uncle Pete. Same worn leather jacket, same tired eyes. He'd been my dad's right-hand man for over 3 decades, and even after semi-retirement, he still held a board seat at Whitman and Sons. I hadn't seen him since the boardroom the day Travis fired me. "Mind if I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside. "It's not much, but sure." He looked around at the bare walls and rental desks, nodding slowly. "Looks like the old days, starting from scratch." "It's temporary," I said. "Doesn't look temporary to me." I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't ask how he was doing. I sat down at my desk, and he took the chair across from me, leaning forward with that same familiar weight in his posture, like he carried more than just years. The board met. Yesterday he started. Emergency meeting, I figured. Travis told us what you did, what I did. Interesting way to phrase it. He says you stole our biggest clients, that you've been planning this for months. I dropped the pencil I was holding and looked him in the eye. He fired me. They followed me. I didn't steal anything. I built those relationships. I earned them. Pete sighed and nodded like he already knew the answer but had to hear me say it out loud. The board's serious about suing Jake. They're not bluffing. My lawyer says I'm clean. No non-compete. No solicitation while I was employed. I've followed every line. Pete shifted in his chair. This isn't just about legality. It's about what's right. Your dad built that company for both of you. You know that. That hit harder than I expected. He was right. Dad always said someday you boys will run it together. But those weren't just dreams, they were his dreams. I glanced at the site plans spread across my desk. This office, this company, the clients, the chaos. That wasn't what Dad wanted. It was what Travis forced. He wanted us to lead side by side, I said. But Travis made a different choice. Pete leaned forward. The company's in trouble, Jake. Real trouble. I know. I ran ops for 15 years. I've got a pretty good idea what kind of hole they're staring down. You don't know all of it. Pete hesitated like he was choosing his next words carefully. The banks are getting nervous. The loan officers are asking questions they weren't asking last week. They should be nervous, I said. Travis leveraged everything for those expansion plans. He used future projects as collateral projects he no longer has. And now those projects are gone, Pete said. The numbers aren't working. They're talking about layoffs. Big ones. It's not just boardroom talk anymore. The wave of guilt that followed caught me off guard. I hadn't meant to tank the company. I just wanted to protect myself. But the fallout was wider than I expected. Employees, foremen, families who had nothing to do with this were now caught in the blast radius. You're asking me to come back, I said. To bring the clients back. Something like that, Pete replied. There's talk of restructuring, co-CEOs, shared leadership, you and Travis as equals. I shook my head slowly. That won't work. I saw his face when he fired me. That wasn't strategy. That was satisfaction. Pete's expression tightened. Your dad's devastated. He's talking about coming out of retirement to fix this. That one landed deep. Dad was 72. He'd had a heart episode just last spring. His cardiologist had been firm less stress, no major decisions, and definitely no boardrooms. And now, because of Travis's ambition and my response to it, he was getting pulled back in. Tell him to stay home, I said. This isn't his mess to clean up. As Pete got up to leave, he turned back at the door. Travis is calling your subcontractors. He's telling them anyone who works with you will never work with Whitman again. And just like that, the air shifted. What he's blacklisting them. Every plumber, electrician, HVAC tech, you name it. They're scared. You're a risk now. I sat in stunned silence as Pete walked out. By the end of that day, half my subcontractors had pulled out. Not with excuses, just apologies. We can't afford to lose Whitman, they said. It's just business. And just like that, the foundation I'd built started to crack. JW Buildworks wasn't even fully off the ground, and it was already bleeding from the knees. If you've ever had someone attack you, not from the front, but from the shadows cutting off your resources, your people, your leverage, leave a comment. I want to know how you fought back, or if you didn't, what you wish you'd done. By nightfall, the numbers were terrifying. Without those subcontractors, I couldn't fulfill my contract with Crestwell. I'd have to find new teams, likely from out of state, and they wouldn't come cheap. The cost increase could burn through nearly all my projected margin. Travis hadn't just retaliated. He'd found the soft spot, the exact pressure point to collapse my operation before it could breathe. I didn't sleep much that night. My phone lit up every hour with more cancellations, more backing out. The guys I trusted the most, men I'd worked beside for years, were going radio silent. Loyalty has limits when it meets fear, and for the first time I felt doubt, not about my choices, but about how deep this war could go, because Travis wasn't just trying to protect Whitman and Sons anymore. He was trying to destroy J.W. Buildworks completely. But early the next morning, I grabbed my truck keys and drove out to the one place I hadn't been since all this began, the home, where it all started. Because if I was going to keep fighting, I needed to face the one man who knew the truth behind both companies, the one person whose disappointment I feared more than anyone else's. My father. The drive out to my parents' place felt heavier than usual. Their home sat on 5 quiet acres just outside Omaha, nestled between rows of cottonwoods and open sky. It was the first real purchase my dad made when the company took off in the late 80s. He always said a man in construction needs to see the horizon every morning. I hadn't been out there since before the boardroom fallout. Too much had happened. Too much had been said or left unsaid. Mom answered the door. She didn't smile, just pulled me into a hug that lingered longer than usual. "He's out back," she whispered. Her face was tired. Not from age, she still had the strength of a woman who'd raised 2 stubborn boys, but from worry. I stepped through the kitchen and onto the back porch where Dad was sitting in his old wooden chair, staring out across the property like he always did. Except today he looked older. Smaller, somehow. "Jake," he said, without turning around. "Hey, Dad." I sat beside him. We said nothing for a while, just sat in silence, watching the wind push through the grass, listening to the faint sound of birds somewhere up in the trees. Then he spoke. "Your brother tells me you're trying to sink the company. That's not what I'm doing. Then what would you call it?" I took a breath. I'm building something of my own, after Travis pushed me out. He finally turned to look at me. His eyes were sharp, but tired. "You two were supposed to carry this together. Tell that to Travis. He fired me in front of the entire board, Dad. Publicly. No warning, just cut me loose. And now you're taking our biggest clients. They chose to come with me. I didn't steal anything." He didn't argue. He just let out a deep, weary sigh and stared back out over the land. "The company's in worse shape than you know." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, hands folded tight. "The books look good on paper, but Travis has been borrowing. A lot. Using future projects as collateral projects. We don't have any more since those clients followed you." My stomach dropped. How deep? Deep enough that if the banks get nervous and call in the loans, we might not survive it. I should have paid closer attention before I stepped back. That's on me. The realization hit me like a steel beam. All those glossy consultant presentations, the expansion talk, the new hires, none of it was organic. Travis had been gambling, betting on growth we couldn't sustain. And now that I'd taken the cornerstone clients, the structure was ready to collapse. Why do you think some people in leadership gamble away stability for vision that isn't theirs to afford? Drop your thoughts in the comments, real stories, real lessons. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I need you to understand what's really at stake. This isn't about pride, or who sits at what desk. If Whitman and Sons goes under, it's not just your brother who suffers. Employees lose jobs. Suppliers lose contracts. Your mother and I are retirements tied into this." I looked at the porch, the old railing he built himself the summer I turned 13. I remembered holding the nails for him, trying to be useful. That porch held 25 years of memories, birthday parties, arguments, Christmases, quiet nights like this one. It was never about the business. It was about what the business gave us. a life, a foundation. I didn't know it was that bad, I said quietly. They won't tell you everything, but Pete thinks they're close to default. If they lose another contract, Travis is pushing the board to sue you because he's out of options. I wanted to be angry again, but it just wasn't there. What replaced it was something heavier responsibility. Not for Travis, not for the board, but for the people in that company who had nothing to do with any of this. I looked at Dad. What do you think they should do? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think a lawsuit would just finish off whatever's left of this family. That line sat in the air like concrete, hard, cold, permanent. If you were in my shoes, would you protect your new business or step in to save the one that betrayed you? Be honest, comment below. This one's personal. I left shortly after. The sky had started turning gold as I pulled out of their long gravel driveway. Every bump in the road echoed in my chest. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just drove. By the time I got back to the office, I knew what I had to do, even if it made no sense to anyone else. Because this wasn't just about winning anymore. It wasn't about proving I was right. It was about making sure something worth saving didn't get buried under pride and bad decisions. I had to find a way to protect what I was building without destroying where I came from. And to do that, I needed to make a few uncomfortable phone calls, starting with the one to Ben Harding. I sat at my desk that evening, the office quiet, except for the low hum of the AC kicking on. The Crestwell plans were spread out in front of me, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the phone. I'd been staring at it for nearly an hour, thinking through every possible outcome, every risk. Calling Ben Harding wasn't just business. It meant putting trust in someone who had already chosen to follow me. And now I was about to ask him to reconsider to split his loyalty for the sake of something bigger than either of us. Finally, I picked up the phone. Ben, I said when he answered, I need a favor. A big one? Name it, he replied without hesitation. After all the times you saved our hides on site, you've earned more than one. I need you to meet with Travis. There was a pause. I'm sorry, what I'm not asking you to go back to Whitman full-time. I'm asking you to hear him out. Maybe split the Crestwell project part with me, part with them. Enough to keep their cash flow alive and the bank off their back. Another long silence. Then, you're asking me to give business to the guy who publicly fired you, the one who's been calling subcontractors to shut you down. It's complicated, I said. Family usually is. I heard the exhale on the other end of the line. You know, Jake, I followed you because I trusted you. Because you never asked for favors, you just delivered. Now you're asking me to bet against that instinct. I'm asking you to help me stop a collapse that'll hurt more than just Travis. This isn't about him. It's about the people who'll lose their jobs if Whitman goes under. My dad. The people in that shop who've been showing up for decades. They don't deserve to go down with him. He didn't answer right away, and I didn't push. Finally, he said, All right, I'll take the meeting. No promises, but I'll listen. Thank you, I said. That's all I'm asking. Once I hung up with Ben, I made 4 more calls. Tanner, at Riverview Sophia, at Blackstone James, at Westfield Victor, at Union Square. Each conversation was harder than the last. These weren't just clients. They were partners, friends. They'd followed me when I walked away. Now I was asking them to reconsider the very company that cast me out. The reactions varied. Tanner thought I was joking. Sophia was outright mad. Do you have any idea how much we're investing with JW Buildworks? She asked. And now you're telling us to split it. I tried to explain calmly, clearly. Eventually, after long pauses, all 5 agreed to at least take a meeting with Travis. By the time I was done, it was nearly midnight. I called my lawyer next, told her what I was planning, and asked her to draft a formal proposal. one that would protect JW Buildworks, offer a pathway for Whitman's survival, and ensure we weren't getting crushed in the process. She didn't love it, but she understood. "You're taking a big gamble," she said. "I know, but it's the right gamble." Then came the final call. I dialed Travis directly. He answered on the third ring. "You've got some nerve. I know about the loans," I said. "Dad told me everything." Silence. Then, "So now you understand." "I do, and I have a proposal. Meet me tomorrow at 7 a.m., my office." "Why would I do that?" "Because I've asked all 5 clients to meet with you." And they agreed. There was a pause, so long I thought the line had dropped. "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch. Just be there." I hung up before he could say anything else. That night I barely slept. I kept going over the numbers, the plan, the possibility of it all blowing up in my face. I wasn't worried about looking foolish. I was worried about losing the company I'd just built and watching another one fall with it. By morning, I was in the office early. I'd shaved, changed into a pressed button-down, and cleared the clutter from my desk. At exactly 7 Rio, Travis walked through the door. He looked different, not smug or confident. Tired, hollowed out. "Sit down," I said. He didn't at first, just stood there, eyes scanning the walls, taking in how far I'd come in such a short time. Then finally he sat. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why help after what I did? I'm not doing it for you," I replied. "I'm doing it for Dad, for the employees, for the family name on the building." He looked at me like he didn't recognize the person across the desk. Then I slid the proposal toward him. It was simple. JW Buildworks and Whitman & Sons enter a joint strategic partnership. We split the 5 major accounts, 3 for Whitman, 2 for me. Enough to keep the bank at bay and both businesses breathing. In return, he would step down as CEO. Dad would come back temporarily while the board found someone neutral. Expansion plans on indefinite hold. He read in silence, then finally looked up. "This is blackmail. This is your second chance. And what if I refuse? Then I keep all 5 clients. You default." Whitman folds. He didn't answer, just stared. I could see the wheels turning, the pride fighting logic, and for a moment I wasn't sure what he would do. If you were in his position, cornered, defeated, would you sign the deal to save the company, or would your ego get in the way? I want to hear your take. Share it below. Let's talk about leadership versus pride. He didn't sign, not yet. But when he walked out of that office, he took the proposal with him, and that was enough for now, because the next 24 hours would determine whether Whitman & Sons could survive, or whether I'd have to watch it collapse in real time. I watched Travis leave my office with the proposal in hand, his steps slower than I'd ever seen. There was no fire in him, no last-word arrogance, just a man carrying the weight of a crumbling company. As soon as the door shut behind him, I exhaled for what felt like the first time that morning. I didn't know if he'd sign, but I knew the message had landed. For the first time, he wasn't holding the cards. He was holding a lifeline. The rest of that day moved like wet concrete, slow, heavy, and full of pressure. I didn't take meetings. I didn't check in on job sites. I spent most of the afternoon pacing my office, staring at my phone, waiting for something, anything. The silence from Travis was deafening. Around 3 p.m., my lawyer called. "Any word yet?" "Not yet," I said. But he took the proposal. "That's something. I hope he signs," she said. "Because if he doesn't, Whitman's collapse could drag your new firm down with it. The subcontractors are already jumpy. Another week of instability, and they'll start walking again." She wasn't wrong. Travis's smear campaign had left deep cracks. Some subs had come back quietly, but others still kept their distance. They liked me, they trusted me, but they needed steady work, and right now JW Buildworks still felt like a bet, not a sure thing. That night I stayed late at the office. The lights outside cast long shadows across the floor as I reviewed numbers, timelines, staff rosters. If Travis refused the deal, I'd survive. But barely. The cost of replacing key subs, rebuilding new relationships, and absorbing Crestwell entirely would bleed the company for months. Maybe longer. It was a strange place to be holding both the power and the risk. If I walked away, I'd win the war but lose the neighborhood. If I leaned in, maybe we all had a chance. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Ben Harding. Just 3 words he just called. My hands tightened around the phone. I dialed immediately. Ben picked up on the second ring. "Jake, you're not gonna believe this," he said. "He signed." I asked. "He signed. Just now. Sent the agreement over, and he asked if I'd be willing to meet tomorrow to start going over the scope division." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Jake Ben continued. He sounded different, not desperate, just real. He said, and I quote, "I let pride cost us too much. I won't let it cost us everything." That hit harder than I expected. "Thanks, Ben," I said. "You helped more than you know." After we hung up, I forwarded the signed agreement to my lawyer and closed my laptop. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in my chest let up. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. If anything, I felt steady. Like I'd finally stopped the bleeding, even if the scar would be permanent. The next morning, I met with Diane, my lead project manager. She was sharp, no nonsense, and knew how to run a crew without wasting words. We went over the new resource allocation, adjusted schedules to reflect the split with Whitman, and prepared notices to subs about the updated structure. Everyone would be paid. No one would lose work. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. Later that afternoon, I called Dad. He picked up on the first ring. "He signed," I said. There was a long pause. "Then I'm proud of you, son." We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. Let me ask you, have you ever had to swallow your ego to fix something bigger than yourself? What did it cost you? What did you gain? Drop your story in the comments. I think more people need to hear what grace under pressure really looks like. By the end of the week, the new arrangement was live. The clients were informed, the subs briefed, the banks notified. Travis stepped down officially, and Dad returned temporarily to steady the ship. The board released a statement to employees framing the move as a strategic pivot during a critical phase. Spin, but necessary spin. The surprising part, Diane was the one who suggested the next move. "You know," she said, pointing to a stack of framed project photos in the old Whitman boardroom, "if we're going to move forward, we need to remember where we came from. People forget stories unless you hang them on the wall." That stuck with me. Because this wasn't just about contracts or survival anymore. It was about rebuilding identity, ours, theirs, mine. And just like that, something new started to take shape between the broken pieces. A different kind of partnership. One built not on trust alone, but on mutual necessity, scars, and history. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time it looked like something worth walking. And just when I thought the dust had finally settled, a familiar voice showed up at my construction site, carrying a hard hat, a cautious smile, and a message I never expected to hear. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. The Crestwell office complex was finally coming to life. Steel framing rising against the sky, concrete decks, poured clean and on schedule. Crews moved with rhythm and confidence, the kind you earn through trust and repetition. I stood near the edge of the site, hard hat on hands in my jacket pockets, watching the first elevator shaft form its skeleton. 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I should have felt proud, and I did. But there was also something else stirring beneath the surface. Something quieter. JW Buildworks had grown not fast, but smart. 38 employees now. No grand promises, no flashy campaigns, just solid work delivered on time. We stayed focused on the 2 clients I'd retained from the original 5 Crestwell and Union Square. No poaching, no encroachment. The agreement with Whitman & Sons was holding steady, and to my surprise, they were holding up their end, too. Across town, Dad had stabilized the company with the new board-appointed CEO, Diane Hartley, a no-nonsense industry vet with a background in risk management and zero tolerance for posturing. She trimmed the fat, shelved the expansion plans, and brought in lean, experienced crews. They weren't aiming for domination anymore, just survival with dignity, and they were getting there. The Whitman name was no longer trying to be the biggest. It was trying to be right-sized. I had just finished reviewing logistics for the 3rd floor when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, Travis, clean-shaven, slightly thinner tan, like he'd spent time outdoors instead of behind a desk. He held a hard hat in one hand, his expression unreadable. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said. He nodded. "Didn't expect to be here, honestly." I gestured toward the build. "It's coming along," I saw. "Looks good," he said, eyes scanning the structure. "Ben Harding called me last week." My pulse ticked up. "Yeah. Said you're 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Said he hasn't had to escalate a single issue since you broke ground." I didn't say anything. Just let the moment sit. He also said you were the only reason Crestwell stuck with Whitman for the joint deal. That without you, we'd have lost everything. Still, I stayed quiet. Travis looked down at the gravel beneath his boots, then back at me. "I came to say I was wrong, about all of it. The firing, the way I handled the transition. I thought I was doing what was best for the company. But I wasn't leading. I was trying to prove I was smarter. That was the moment, the one I hadn't thought I'd ever get. Not just an apology, but clarity, regret that wasn't rehearsed or transactional. I told Ben, you were the engine behind our success." He continued. "I didn't want to believe it then, but I see it now." I looked at him wondering if this was closure or the beginning of something else. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt level, honest, grounded in a way I hadn't been in years. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "Working for a development firm out in Denver, mid-size. They do infill projects, mixed-use stuff. I'm not in charge, just part of a team. It's been good for me. Stripped me down a bit." "You happy?" He nodded slowly. "Getting there." That silence again. The one we used to share as kids, sitting on the roof of the barn, waiting for Dad to come home from a job site. "You looking for work?" I asked, half joking. He smiled. "No. Not yet, anyway." Then he paused. "But if I'm being honest, I could use some contacts out there. Denver's a good market, but competitive." I pulled out my phone. "Ben's got a few. Sophia at Blackstone knows people in Colorado, too. I'll text you some names." "You'd do that for me?" he asked. "I'm not doing it for you," I said. "I'm doing it for the name we both carry. And maybe for the version of you who used to sit at Dad's workbench, drawing skyscrapers with a crayon." We shook hands. Nothing grand. Just a firm shake, solid, respectful. He turned to leave, and I stood there a while longer, listening to the sound of nail guns and concrete mixers in the distance. "Let me ask you this. What do you do when someone who hurt you finally takes accountability? Do you shut the door or leave it cracked open?" Drop your thoughts in the comments. We've all had to decide whether grace is earned or given. Travis never asked for forgiveness that day, and I never offered it. But something shifted. Not a clean slate, but a cleared path. And as I watched him walk away across the site, I realized something maybe building was always the Whitman way, not just with concrete and steel, but with second chances. The following spring, A quiet invite arrived from Whitman & Sons headquarters. Not for a project, not for a partnership, but for something far more personal. Something framed in wood and memory waiting for me back where it all began. ChatGPT John Noy. The envelope came on a rainy Tuesday. No logo, no sender name, just my name handwritten in clean block letters. Inside was a single card, simple and formal. You are invited to a private gathering at Whitman & Sons headquarters. Friday at 10 a.m., executive floor. No other details, just a time and a place. It didn't feel like a meeting, and it definitely wasn't business. I turned the card over a few times, waiting for some kind of gut instinct to kick in. I hadn't stepped foot in that building since the day Travis fired me. Not once. I'd driven past it a handful of times, always looking away before I caught myself staring too long. I told myself I'd moved on, and in many ways I had. But this card, this was pulling me back in. Friday morning came fast. I parked in the same visitor spot I'd used that day nearly a year ago. The lobby looked the same, polished floors, framed awards on the walls, but the energy was different, leaner, more focused. No receptionists making small talk, just a quiet professionalism that felt earned, not performed. Diane was waiting for me at the elevator. She gave me a small nod and didn't bother with pleasantries. Upstairs, she said. The elevator ride was short, but quiet. When the doors opened on the executive floor, I almost didn't recognize it. The oversized glass conference table was gone. In its place was a large, reclaimed wood table that looked handmade rough around the edges. The abstract art that used to hang on the walls had been replaced by framed photographs, projects or old and new job sites, captured in golden light foreman in dusty gear, steel beams rising into the sky. And there on the wall, behind the head of the table, were 3 framed photos in perfect alignment. One of my grandfather standing beside his first 2 trucks, taken in 1953. Another of Dad, in a hard hat, breaking ground on the first major project Whitman ever took back in 1988. And the last one? Me. Shaking hands with the mayor 10 years ago, the morning after we finished the Meridian Tower 3 weeks ahead of schedule. I hadn't seen that photo in years. Diane stepped forward. "That was my idea," she said. "You built a big part of this company. Thought it should be reflected here." I didn't know what to say. For a long second, I just stared at the photos. They weren't polished. They weren't part of a campaign. They were honest. "We call it the foundation wall," she added. I nodded slowly. "It's good." Just then Dad walked in. He looked better rested, more like himself. Retirement suited him this time. No stress lines, no phone in hand, just calm, quiet pride. "You came," he said. "You invited me." He smiled. "We're not making a fuss. Just wanted to mark the anniversary. 1 year since we transitioned leadership. 1 year since things changed. You mean 1 year since everything almost fell apart." He chuckled. "That too." He motioned to the new table. We had this made from leftover oak we salvaged from the old supply yard. Thought it was time to sit at something built with hands, not just numbers. I ran my palm across the wood. It was rough in spots, imperfect, but solid, like something meant to last. Travis didn't show up, and I didn't expect him to. That wasn't the point. This wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a forgiveness ceremony. It was a recognition, a quiet nod to what had been built, torn down, and rebuilt again. Dad pulled a small wooden box from his coat. "I've been holding on to this," he said, opening it to reveal a rusted old wrench, my grandfather's. He used this on the very first job. Said if you couldn't fix something with this, it probably wasn't worth fixing. He handed it to me. "I think it belongs with you now." I held it for a long time, the weight familiar and foreign, all at once. The metal was worn, the grip smooth from years of use. It wasn't just a tool, it was proof that something real had been built before me, and now maybe because of me could continue. Let me ask you this, if someone handed you the symbol of everything your family stood for, would you accept it? Or would it feel too heavy to carry? I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments. Share what legacy means to you. Before I left, Diane handed me a folder. We're starting a mentorship program, she said, for young project managers, training real field experience, the stuff schools don't teach. Your name came up. I looked at her. You want me to help if you're willing. I gave her a slow nod. Yeah, I think I am. And as I walked out of that building for the second time, something felt different. Not like closure, but like a door I didn't realize I'd left open. And I had a feeling the next place that door would lead was already taking shape. Somewhere I hadn't been in a long, long time. 3 weeks after the visit to Whitman & Sons, I found myself sitting alone in my office at JW Buildworks late one evening, the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the distant sound of a radio playing in the break room. On my desk sat the old wrench my father had given me, placed beside a neat stack of resumes. All young project managers, fresh out of school, or barely 2 years into the field. Their applications were solid technical degrees, internships, strong references. But what caught me most were the cover letters. Nearly all of them wrote the same thing: they wanted to build something real. The mentorship program was becoming more than an idea. Diane and I had drafted the structure over coffee and blueprint scrolls, hands-on rotations, shadowing real job sites, no fluff, no boardroom simulations. We wanted to teach what couldn't be taught in textbooks: how to manage crews during heat waves, how to calm down a frustrated site inspector, how to order material substitutions when the supplier flakes at 4:30 on a Friday. We wanted to teach them how to lead without needing to say much. As I sat reading one of the applications, a young woman from Kansas City who said her grandfather was a drywall finisher and inspired her to pursue construction, I thought about how far this story had traveled. 1 year ago, I was walking out of a boardroom in silence, stripped of my title and blind to what was coming next. Now here I was, not only leading my own company, but shaping how the next generation would learn the ropes. Still, something was missing. That weekend, I visited the old Whitman job yard for the first time in years. It wasn't officially open, downsized, and converted to storage mostly, but I still had a key. I walked the cracked concrete path past the line of faded red trailers and stopped at the old tool shed. Inside, dust clung to the shelves, and the air smelled of motor oil and pine. I spotted the bench where my brother and I used to sit as kids, passing Dad the socket wrenches he called out for during late-night repairs. The wood was warped now. Rust crept up the vice grip, bolted into the edge. But it was still there, still real. I stood there for a while, hand resting on that old vice, and something settled in my chest. Not regret, not nostalgia either. Just a quiet understanding that time moves on, but places remember. Let me ask you something. Have you ever returned to a place you thought you'd left behind for good, only to realize it still held part of who you were? Drop your stories in the comments. We carry more from our past than we think. Back at JW Buildworks that Monday, I called a full team meeting. Everyone from interns to site leads gathered in the open-floor conference room. No ties, no scripts, just the crew that had helped me pull this company out of nothing. I've been thinking about how we move forward, I began. Not just how we grow, but how we build something that lasts, something that teaches the next crew coming up. I introduced the mentorship initiative, showed the sample curriculum Diane and I had drafted, and laid out our goals. The response was better than I expected. Several of my senior foremen offered to run field rotations. One of our estimators volunteered to lead bid writing workshops. Then one of the youngest project assistants, Luis, barely 22, raised his hand. "Do you think we could visit the Whitman yard sometime, just to see where it started?" That caught me off guard. "Sure," I said after a beat. "We can make that happen." He smiled. "I just think it'd be cool to see the roots, you know." And that was it. The moment. The wave. The realization that the next chapter wasn't just about me, or Travis, or Dad. It was about what came next. About how the legacy we spent decades building wasn't in danger of being lost. It was being extended by new hands, eager ones, still clean and uncalloused, but ready. We wrapped the meeting with pizza and laughter like any Friday wrap-up should end. And as I watched the room full of new faces, some just months into the job, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not because it was perfect, not because it was safe, but because it was honest and it was real. Later that night, as I locked up the office, I passed the old photograph I'd hung in the hallway, me, Dad, and Travis, taken 20 years ago, standing in front of our first major office remodel. We were all covered in drywall dust and grinning like idiots. I stopped and looked at it longer than I expected. Then I turned off the light and stepped out into the cool spring night, thinking about a new kind of groundbreaking that was already in motion, one that didn't need steel or concrete, just intention, and a name that still meant something no matter where the blueprints were drawn next. It was a chilly Thursday morning when I stood in front of the old Whitman job yard, again this time. Not alone. A group of 6 young project managers from our mentorship program waited behind me, clipboards in hand, steel-toed boots crunching against the gravel. Luis, the intern who'd asked about visiting, had his phone out, recording the moment. Most of them had never seen the place where it all started, before the downtown office, before the logos and polished branding, just tools, dust, and hope. I unlocked the chain on the side gate and pushed it open. The smell hit me instantly, a mix of sawdust, motor oil, and aged lumber. It was the scent of every early morning I'd ever known. I led them through the yard, pointing out the old storage trailers, the original brake shack that looked like it might collapse with a stiff breeze, and finally the tool shed still holding the scars of decades of calloused hands. Inside, I paused next to the workbench I used to share with Travis. The vise was still there, rusted and unmoved. This is where we learned everything I said quietly. Before spreadsheets and schedules, before the contracts, just raw materials and the will to figure it out. Luis stepped forward and ran his fingers across the old wooden bench. "It's like a time capsule." "It is," I said, "but it's also a mirror. What you're building now, it's no different than what started here. Different tools, same truth." We stayed there for a while, not talking much. The silence felt right. Then something happened that none of us expected. One of the young guys, Ryan, a quiet, detail-oriented type, who rarely spoke during meetings, pulled out a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. "I wrote something," he said. "Didn't think I'd read it, but standing here now, it feels right." He unfolded the paper and began reading. It was short, a reflection on what it meant to start with nothing but an idea, about how his dad had worked as a concrete finisher for 30 years and never owned a company shirt with his name on it, about how he wanted to build something where guys like his dad could walk in and feel seen. By the end of it, none of us said a word. Luis had turned off his phone. Everyone just nodded. Let me ask you, have you ever been in a moment that was supposed to be about history, and instead it became about the future? About how far you've come, and how far someone else might go, because of what you left behind? Share that moment in the comments. I think more people need to hear how legacy really works. Later that afternoon, back at the office, I sat with Diane and went over the rollout schedule for the mentorship program. We had 10 mentees lined up, each paired with a senior lead. Job shadowing would start the following Monday with evaluations every 6 weeks. She had also lined up partnerships with a local trade school and a community college for apprenticeships and certification support. It was growing faster than either of us expected. You realize this could outlast the company itself, she said, scanning the numbers. It's bigger than just us. I'm counting on it, I replied. That evening I got a call from Ben Harding. Crestwell was wrapping up the final punch list on the downtown office project. They wanted to throw a small thank you gathering for the teams involved, just an informal mixer at the site. You should come, Ben said. No speeches, just people. I almost said no. My instinct was always to keep moving on to the next job, the next challenge. But something about his voice, the simplicity of the offer, made me pause. I'll be there, I said. The event was nothing flashy. Folding tables, sandwiches, soft drinks in coolers. The crews wore jeans and hoodies, most of them just coming off shift. Ben gave me a firm handshake when I arrived. He didn't say much, just pointed to a group near the back corner, electrician site, managers, plumbers, and a few of the interns from our program standing nearby, wide-eyed and listening. They're watching you, he said. Whether you talk or not, they're watching. He wasn't wrong. Every choice we made, every deal we shook on or walked away from, every time we treated people with respect or cut corners, they noticed, and they remembered. As the sun dipped behind the steel framework of the next phase of the Crestwell expansion, I walked the perimeter alone. I passed the freshly poured sidewalks, the curb ramps, the landscaping markers, and I stopped next to a single engraved concrete stamp near the entrance. It had the project date and initials etched in JW+CW May 2024. I crouched down and ran my fingers over it. Jake Whitman and Crestwell Ben said from behind me. That was the team lead's idea. Said you made it personal. I didn't answer. I just stood up and looked back at the building, thinking about how far we'd come since that first call in the truck. Travis was out in Denver, now building something of his own. We hadn't spoken since that day on the job site, but I'd heard through Ben that he was doing okay, finding his footing. Funny how something as unstable as betrayal can, if handled right, become a foundation for something new. That night as I left the site, I felt something shift. Not a big thing, not a finish line, but a small sense of clarity that maybe the hardest rebuild wasn't the office tower or the business. It was the way we rebuild ourselves. And I wasn't done yet, because the next visit wasn't for me. It was for someone who hadn't stepped into that building in over a year, and it was time. The call came from Mom on a quiet Sunday morning. I was in the middle of making pancakes for my daughter Blueberry, her favorite, when my phone buzzed across the counter. She didn't ask how I was or make small talk. She just said, "He wants to come back and see it." I knew exactly who she meant. Dad hadn't set foot inside the Whitman & Sons building since stepping down the second time, after the financial collapse had been narrowly avoided and Diane took over as CEO. He'd gone fully into retirement without looking back. He told me once that he'd given it all. He had his lungs, his knees, his heart, and when it was time to let go, he needed to mean it. But now he was asking to return, not for a meeting, not for control, just to see. So that Tuesday, I drove him. He didn't say much during the ride, just stared out the window, his fingers tapping lightly against his cane. Age had crept up fast. The man who once swung 20-foot steel beams by hand now moved with careful, deliberate steps, but his eyes still carried that old spark, like he was measuring something invisible, calculating structural load in his mind out of habit. We pulled up to the building he built with his name, the same one where my brother had fired me, where I'd walked out with everything I thought I'd lost. It looked the same from the outside, brick steel, the clean-lined signage, but inside, everything had shifted. For the better. Diane met us in the lobby. She shook his hand, looked him square in the eyes, and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Whitman. We've been waiting for you." She led us upstairs to the executive floor, now remodeled into what felt more like a working command center than a suite of offices. Gone were the corner offices with leather chairs and tinted glass. In their place, shared desks, wall-length whiteboards, and digital dashboards tracking live project timelines. It was lean, smart, functional. Dad nodded slowly. "It's efficient," he said. "No wasted space." Diane smiled. That was the idea. We showed him the foundation wall. He stared at the 3 framed photos, his father, himself, and me, for a long time, without speaking. Then he reached up, adjusted the frame of the one with him holding the shovel in '88, and let out a slow breath. "You kept it honest," he said, mostly to himself. From there we walked through the bullpen. Engineers and coordinators glanced up from their desks, then stood quietly as he passed. Not out of obligation, but something deeper respect. Dad never chased titles, but he earned his reputation by being the kind of man who showed up first and left last, even when it hurt. Then came the highlight. Diane led him down the hall, into what used to be the old boardroom. The walls had been stripped down to the studs and rebuilt with reclaimed wood paneling. At the far end was a table he'd never seen, the oak table we had made from the old yard's leftover lumber, the one we now used for mentorship meetings, bid reviews, and major project strategy sessions. In the center of the table, Diane had placed a single object, a dusty metal lunchbox. His lunchbox. "I found it in the old storage locker," she said. "We thought it belonged here." Dad walked over, ran his hand along the curved lid, and nodded. This came with me on every job for 25 years. Then quietly he sat down at the table. For a full minute, no one said anything. I watched him sit there, head slightly bowed, hands resting gently on the wood. I knew what was happening. He wasn't mourning. He wasn't reclaiming something. He was releasing it. "Let me ask you, if you had the chance to revisit the very place you gave your life to, would you? Would you want to see how it changed without you? Or would you let it live on in memory?" Share your answer in the comments. I think a lot of us wrestle with letting go versus holding on. After a while, Dad looked at Diane. "You've done good work here. You made it your own without tearing down what we built." She didn't thank him. She just said, "We're trying to honor it while evolving." He turned to me. "And you? You built your own thing, but never tried to bury the name. That matters more than you know." I swallowed hard. I didn't build JW Buildworks to compete with Whitman. I built it because I needed a place to stand. But I never wanted to tear this down to do it. He stood up, slowly rested a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Then we did something right." We left shortly after. The building faded into the rearview mirror, but something stayed with me. That feeling of alignment, of roots and branches growing at the same time. Back at the house, just before I left him for the night, he handed me something wrapped in an old shop rag. It was his original carpenter's pencil, worn down flat, and still marked with faded red from a long-forgotten framing job. "I don't need it anymore," he said, "but maybe someone else will." I looked at the pencil for a long time, thinking about the line it had once drawn, a line that began in the dirt, stretched through concrete, and reached all the way into this new generation. A line I was now responsible for extending. and I knew exactly where I'd draw the next mark. 1 year to the day after I was fired, I stood at the edge of the Crestwell project site, watching the final layer of exterior glass being installed. The sun hit the panels just right, reflecting the sky back at itself, like a mirror clean sharp, complete. I thought about everything that had happened since that boardroom moment. The anger, the doubt, the rebuilding. But more than anything, I thought about the people who stood with me, and the ones I used to stand beside. I was no longer the man who walked out that day in silence. I was someone who had learned that building something of value doesn't start with blueprints or budgets. It starts with who you choose to be when everything falls apart. Whitman & Sons survived. JW Buildworks grew. And somewhere in the middle of all that progress, the walls between competition and compassion began to fade. My brother found his own way. My father found peace, and I found something I never expected: respect for the journey, even the broken parts. Because it turns out those cracks aren't weaknesses. They're where the light gets in. We spend a lot of time chasing legacy, but legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we pass forward, in tools, in stories, in the way we treat people when no one's watching. That old pencil my dad gave me. It's on my desk now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that every structure begins with one honest line, and it's our job to draw it straight. If this story moved you, I want to hear about it. Share in the comments. What did you have to rebuild in your life? What moment defined your second chance? And if you found value here, subscribe to this channel, not just for this story, but for everyone like it. Because around here, we don't just tell stories, we preserve the ones that matter. Stories about family forgiveness and starting over the right way. Stories that remind us it's never too late to build something that lasts.